just want to make sure you all can see me now. Great. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, thank you all so much for being here and being a part of this training. It is just a lot of general information, but also information I think that if you are not necessarily kind of doing these things or having these plans when it comes to your own organizations, that it is really worthwhile to think about incorporating these things. Now, many of you are very, very familiar with this work already. So a lot of it may be a reminder for you, but I think oftentimes we know the information, the implementation and the execution of that information is what is key. I know we're all stretched. We are still, and will be for years, in recovery for Hurricane Ian. Many of you have dealt with so many other emergencies in your communities, and so we're tired. It's hard sometimes to kind of gear back into whichever phase of the disaster cycle we're in, but paying some extra attention to that is extremely important. So part of this is just encouraging you, strongly encouraging you in that, to review what you have, and to think through some of this systemically, as well as for your own personal benefit. And who can you share some of this information with that may need it in your organizations as well? Because structure is something that is so, people don't always pay a whole lot of attention to. That scramble is going to happen because it is disaster response. But we know so much planning that can be done, and we want to try to do that if we can. Okay, so again, a lot of this may be familiar for a lot of you, but also I think wanting to throw out some ideas and some thoughts within these parameters that will be helpful for you. All right, can one person tell me, I just want to make sure you're seeing not the presenter view, you're just seeing the slide. And somebody confirm that for me in the chat. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, guys. All right, so let's go ahead and keep moving here. So, of course, we know what is most important is preparedness. Before we talk about volunteers, before we talk about recruiting them, managing them, planning for them, it is so critical for you all, as well as your volunteers, your clients, the people around you. If you are someone who potentially will respond to a disaster, what are all of the spheres of influences and components of your life that you need preparedness for? So these are just a couple of the websites. You will get the slides should you care to have them. I will email them out. And of course, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat or feel free to email me afterwards about it. My email address within the news blast that you all received. Okay, so a couple of websites about that. I know there's a lot of box checking that we do, but I will tell you that a number of disasters that have occurred in the state, I have been supporting Christy, our emergency management director, or connecting with someone on it, and have seen a number of things that I would never have thought of with preparedness. So we have these websites, but then also for your specific organization, your specific home, your family, some of that can look very different. You know, when Hurricane Michael hit, I'm in Tallahassee, we got some of those bands, and I had a 6-month-old, 5-month-old at the time. A lot about what my preparedness looked like was very different than it would a year before that when it was just my husband and myself. So really paying attention to some of those realities are extremely important. So this is for personal purposes, but also, again, staff. Here's the thing is we can give people, like I'm giving you, websites for information, but particularly for those of you in disaster relief organizations, I know you can't make people do these things, but how purposeful are you in helping people understand what they need? And that includes all your affiliated volunteers, the individuals who are already connected to you. How much do they know about preparedness? And again, not just a website or two, but how many direct conversations are you having with them about the personal nature of preparedness? and how critical it is for them, I think is a really important kind of messaging component here. So again, looking at the basics of what the things are that are needed. And in your organization, of course, for your staff, we just talked about COOP planning, which I'll explain in a second, but that food, water, shelter, all those basics are there. But your communication among staff members, auto responses for emails and voicemail, call and email volume, are you prepared for that? In terms of continuity of operations, which is COOP, C-O-O-P, where are you going to go if something happens to your building? Things like that you can think about ahead of time. Again, so many of you have done that, but these are the things that are worth processing. And with those auto responses, with those call volume, all of that, how much are you updating that? Because what happens on the day right before, for example, a hurricane hits, is going to be different messaging information than what you may hear 2 days from then. So is somebody going to be consistently updating that information for the public, for your internal staff? That was my job. Christy was in the EOC. Christy, again, our emergency management director, and I was doing all the internal staff communications, or most of that. And so much of it was, what are we sharing with the public? I am not the communications person, but I was the person giving that information. Who's going to be doing that consistently? Is there a need or a way to check on staff to make sure that they are safe? And then all the volume you're getting, what can you say in an email, on social, that is going to be relevant to the layperson? Those are some of the big picture things. And especially for your volunteers, if you have those affiliated people who are ready to go, what information do they need that's most important? What can they disseminate to their spheres of influence? We know that in volunteering, family members, roommates, friends have the most influence over people volunteering. The most influence, we all know this and we experience this in life, over how we make choices about a lot of things. So those are some ambassadors that you have, those existing volunteers, to help you get this kind of information out, to help you decide and think through what needs to be posted, what needs to be shared, and then going from there and helping to disseminate that key information. So here's another thing I just wanted to share with you all, and this is the ready.gov website, but they also have free training courses through FEMA. I'm not going to say they are thrilling. I have taken many of them. So it's not the most exciting thing that you would do, but this is that insider information for you that can really kind of blow your mind when you think about what the structure is. We see the news cycle when it comes to disaster relief. And those of us with our heads down, or who are learning about disaster relief, who want to be involved in it as organizations, when you know the structure of these things, it helps so much with being able to promote and share information with the public, with your volunteers, so they are best equipped, both with their personal lives as well as in the work that they're doing, to know how this stuff works. And we need to know it too. Again, some of this may be refreshers, but this is important, and those free training lessons are available through FEMA's Emergency Management Institute. And there are plenty of them. Again, I took 5. I've got to be kind of a backup of a backup for the Emergency Operations Center. And I was blown away by some of the reasoning behind things that people may get frustrated with or impatient with. Oftentimes there is a reason why things are the way that they are. And that's part of why I wanted to do a training like this, is to talk about it. We have to prepare, we have to think about what we need to be able to communicate. We have to understand the bigger structure of things. That really helps as we move along and recognize there's a way that these things work that help to make things more efficient. It's not going to be perfect. It's an emergency. It's a disaster. And if you've seen one disaster, you have seen one disaster. So wanting to be sure that we have that background information that we can convey to others and also use to help us make decisions about things. All right, so language. Just wanted to share this with you all. Most of you know our 3 glorious C's. This is not something that Volunteer Florida made up, although some people think that. FEMA essentially has something just like this, as well as a couple of other states, but this is that immediate response information. So for your organizations, when something is happening, are you making sure that the people who come to you typically, it doesn't matter if you're arts and culture, legal services, emergency management, that those individuals know immediately what needs to happen? Do your volunteers know that? Again, we're talking about clients, staff, volunteers. Obviously, we're focusing on volunteers here, but do they understand the context for their service and the context for your organization and the work that you do? Now, with affiliation, which is having those volunteers prior to an emergency who are trained, this is the kind of thing that is so helpful for them. I cannot tell you the number of times I've talked to an organization that is scrambling for what to say to people. They maybe had the preparedness kit information and then something hits and they aren't aware of what else they can tell people. They're handling every individual email and call and it's overwhelming. Listen, if you cannot respond, you put that auto response on with the information you know will be most helpful for people so that you can get going with the work that you need to get done. Again, for your volunteers, your clients, your staff, these are some of, and of course, I'm not going to torture you by reading it to you, but these are some of those basics we want to be sure people know and they understand. And some of this is something you can take on as a public information responsibility for your community, and that your volunteers can learn more about, that your volunteers can be sharing, again, with your spheres of influence here, okay? And this is the kind of thing you tell them when people want to come in and support. This is the kind of information, along with not self-deploying, of course, that is the most critical one. So here's one of the things that I think frames our volunteers and managing that affiliated volunteer versus that spontaneous volunteer. And this is something that I kind of smushed together a few years ago. But again, all this language, just use it, right? If you're inundated with people who are wanting to serve, use the language that you know is logical, rational, that you can back up, so that when people are frustrated because they're not able to serve, they're not getting the information they need, all of that is going to be part of it. But a big part of this is us understanding the structure, knowing where we fit as an organization in our community, and then also being able to provide the detail for it. When we do our calls, I mean, we hundreds and hundreds of emails and calls at Volunteer Florida. It makes sense because of the work that we do, but this is the information on our auto response. It's what's on our website. When we are trying to manage that large scale kind of inundation, that scrambling, so that we can do some of the other things we need to do in our jobs. So this was immediate assistance is provided by first responders, government groups, disaster relief organizations, affiliated volunteers who have already trained to serve. If you are an organization that would like to have a better understanding and a better way to plug in so that you can support disaster relief, it has to happen prior to the disaster. Now, there are plenty of organizations that are coming in. That part is always going to happen, but that best connection is to develop those relationships ahead of time. That immediate assistance work, that is going on with a lot of you who are on this call or who are on the what is this called? What's a call, I guess, this Zoom. But if you want to get involved, if you want to have a way to be connected to your community during these times, know that this is happening prior to a disaster or some sort of emergency, all of that planning. Each organization that mobilizes volunteers has its own process. We get people all the time who not only just Volunteer Florida, but they assume all the disaster relief organizations have some sort of standardized way of recruiting or training volunteers. And that is not how that goes. Again, with public information. When people understand that that's not how it works, they may still be frustrated about it, but you know that you have given the right information so that people recognize, yeah, no, if I am the American Red Cross, or I am Citrus County CERT, or I am the Council on Culture and the Arts, whatever the organization is, when people say, I want to help, you can say, here's kind of how it works. And that is so important, because that is one of our most common things is people think there is some seamless system to perfectly plug them in the moment. And that is not the case. And if we back up from this, what this is saying is, do you have a plan for how you mobilize volunteers during a disaster? If you are an organization that is not in disaster relief, you can be a huge part of your community's planning, the response, and the recovery there. We have seen it over and over again. We're going to talk about how that kind of works in just a minute. But all of that during what's called blue sky, which is when the disaster is not actually occurring, that's gray sky, have the opportunity to connect and figure out how best to be an organization that has that specific process for volunteers so that you're a reference point, right? We have our partners that we know have ways to vet volunteers, know who they're going to be partnered with, and those are the people that we are focused on when we want to funnel people to serve. So if you can get connected with the organizations doing that, A, you could probably copy and paste a lot from them. We share a lot of information. B, figure out where you fit in, even if your organization is not one that's connected to disaster relief. And for those of you who are in the EM field, are there organizations that are a little bit outside of your scope that could bring fresh ideas, fresh perspectives, differences, whether it's about areas of your community or it's about different types of groups? It could be, like I said, arts and culture, parks and rec, environmental stewardship, animal welfare. And I know many of you already have those connections, but are there more people you can either bring into the fold or share this kind of information with in your community so that they get how you work? And if they get how you work, they can share with other people, with the public. Because yes, we have our government groups putting information out, we have social media, but we have a lot of misinformation out there as well. So the individuals, the organizations you can bring in so that they know how it all works is going to be so helpful for them, in addition to helping them understand how they can mobilize volunteers to serve during disaster. So I'm not going to go over this too much, but there is a cycle when it comes to disaster. Life with disasters and emergency management, and we're always in one of them. So it never ends. There's reprieve, and we hope there's a long one now, but we are in recovery right now with Hurricane Ian specifically. So everybody is working together on this, and I think it's easy to forget. We have our things that we're working on when it comes to disaster, and we've got our partners that we work with, but there's still so many other things going on there. The three sectors, all of them are required to meet those needs that are necessary during disaster relief: public sector, private sector, nonprofit, independent sector. Okay, so wanted to just quickly, I'll do this quickly. The state of Florida state government has a state emergency response team, and that team overarches all of the work that the state does if the state declares a particular disaster to be something that the state can step in on, because disasters start as local issues to be cared for, and then the local community says we need the state's help. But so this is an established reality. This isn't an informal group of people who get together to chit chat about emergency management. This is developed with hundreds of pages of words, of diagrams, of planning that go into how to manage incidents. Okay, so this is not, this is an extremely formalized reality. I can't see you all, so if you roll your eyes because it's government, for example, or whatever kind of predisposed notions a lot of times we have about these things, and we can get frustrated for so many different reasons because we're working with human beings and with structures that aren't perfect, which we have to try to remind ourselves of. We need this. So many of you think outside of the box, and hopefully you will after kind of learning some of these things as well. But we also have to have the box in order to know how to think outside of it, is something that I've started to say, right? Because that gives us a foundation and a context so that we can think more about other ideas and other effective ways to do things, okay? So here's the kicker too, is there are specific reasons and purposes for each of your organizations. What's your mission? What do you do during preparedness, response, recovery? If you're not doing this kind of work, that is fine. But again, you can be sharing this information, some of these structural realities about how all of this works with your staff, with your volunteers. You can help to start connecting them to the bigger disaster relief picture by knowing some of these things. So there are expectations and priorities for the state emergency response team. So I can get calls and people say, well, why aren't you doing this? And I can say, because that's not my role. Now I know. Underneath that, it sounds like that's not my job in a, that's a potentially negative thing, but there is specialization and division of labor that has to happen with something like this, with most things. And so there are support functions within the state emergency response team. Not going to read through these, but there are 20 of them, and a state agency is responsible for each of these. And these folks sit in the emergency operations center to do this work. Okay. So again, I'm just trying to give you some structure. A lot of this is about having more than just the preparedness information so that you know where you fit in all of this. And there's, when we get to VOAD, COAD, LTRGs, that's really where it starts to be most relevant. And we'll talk more in detail about volunteers in a second. Here's what we do. Volunteer Florida has 3 mission areas. One is national service, so that's AmeriCorps and other federal grant dollars. Every state has a state service commission. Not all of them do EM, but they all do AmeriCorps of some kind. So we have 49 or actually 50 sister agencies, so to speak, around the country. They just kind of look differently in terms of the other components of what they do. The second is promoting volunteerism. That's me. And we do it in so many different ways through the other departments as well, but promoting it, fostering it, training, those kinds of things. And then our third is for our state emergency management. So high level, we are the state's lead agency for volunteers and donations. I am not placing volunteers for you, or I'm not placing volunteers for their own benefit. We get tons of calls about that. I want to volunteer this afternoon right now. And some of you may get that as well. But a lot of you may have volunteers who have been working with you who now don't know what to do. And so this is what I'm saying. If you're an organization that's not disaster relief, you could pair up with a disaster or relief organization in your community, and your volunteers could be trained to be volunteers for that other entity, right? You can have a cooperative relationship so that you're able to funnel trained volunteers into the work that that entity does that they're good at. Because if I'm an organization and it's not my specialty, when we're in the middle of a disaster, it's not the best time to try to figure out something that you haven't done before. Sometimes that happens, that's fine. If that's worked and you've had that experience, great, but we're typically looking at the people who do this. How do we bring everybody together, look at where you fit in ahead of time, and then you can be a part of that work in response or in recovery in a way that you wouldn't have been had you not been coordinating and connecting with people. And that's a lot of what we do, is pulling people together, having them connect and communicate. Those of you who know Christy, she is a wealth of knowledge and just like cool as a cucumber all the time. She's really like that. I'm in the office with her. I know you all see her out and about, but that is Christy, just so you know. That's the inside scoop about her. Just extraordinary and great at connections and networking and the liaison work. And some of you, that's what you do. It's bigger picture. It's not that you are directly managing boots on the ground volunteers, but thinking about what your responsibilities are and who you're connected with to help with volunteers getting connected to disaster relief opportunities. All of that is really important and are things to be thinking about. So yes, big picture. Our foundation has the Florida Disaster Fund. We work with many of you. Most of our partners are through VOAD, which we'll talk about in a second. But that's just a listing of the things technically that we do and that we actually do. But those are listed in the comprehensive emergency plan for the state. So when we are not doing certain other things, that's because another state entity is the bigger picture kind of overseer of that work. Plenty of things are happening in this state, extraordinary things, and they don't have anything to do with the government. but we have to communicate with each other in order to know how best to support, how not to duplicate, how to keep people safe, and help during recovery in particular. Okay. So I'm going to skip this for now. All right. I'm looking in the chat. If you got here a little bit later, please put your name and your organization in. But let me see. All right. Let me see how many VOAD partners I see, or people who should be. All right. Hey, y'all. Okay. I'm just looking through. Okay. No, this is great. All right. There we go. Awesome. Okay, great. So if you're not involved with your local VOAD or the state VOAD, and it doesn't mean that you lined up exactly with this, but even if it is sitting in on a meeting, even if it is talking to the president of the local VOAD or one of the officers at our state level, or one of the VOAD partners at the state level who's in your area, having conversations with people who are committed to this particular type of work and to networking and to continuing education about it is extremely important. If you're a VOAD partner and you think those meetings are boring, or you're kind of tapped out from that, totally get it. But staying on top of what potential relationships could be developed, new funding sources, there's so much there. How spontaneous volunteers are being managed, how they're being supported during recovery, all those things. We have a lot of structures, but we can always be learning about what we can do better. And oftentimes that comes with that synergy, right? The sum is greater than its parts. So with VOAD, it is a membership association. There's national, state, and then some counties and areas have local VOADs, but work very, very closely with us and with other of those support functions and with each other. And this is where, if your organization is not directly doing disaster relief, find out what it looks like in your community, what it's looked like in your community. It may not look the same the next time you have to deal with something unfortunate like a disaster, which hopefully we don't have. I don't know, that's not what it's my hand, but knock on something. So hopefully we don't have that, but in the midst of that, there's still preparedness. There's plenty of recovery going on. There are ideas and thoughts that come about that you can use in your organization to maximize its efficiency and effectiveness. It is a great way to simply encourage one another, to vent about things, to help pull more people in your community to better understand how to support one another during a disaster. So if you are not familiar, okay, let's see, Hanny. Awesome. Great. Thank you. I'm actually going to touch base with you about that. So VOAD is a really important component of this. Let's see, Anna. I know our food banks, a number of you, of course, EM entities are connected with us. We've got CERT on here, Habitat. Okay, great. So most of you are familiar. If you're not, I strongly encourage you to go to the Florida VOAD website, go to the National VOAD website, look at what they do, and recognize that even just sitting in, getting to know a couple of your community partners that are involved with it, find out what it looks like for people to come together in your community and how your organization can really fit in there. Okay. So this is from the VOAD website, the National VOAD website, but there's 4 C's: cooperation, communication, coordination, and collaboration. And it says fosters more effective delivery of services. And this is true. Now, here's what I really want to emphasize. And I said it before, human beings are not perfect. Organizations aren't perfect. No sector is perfect. We have to deal with a lot of emotions, a lot of being drained mentally, a lot of, I really believe I have the idea or the outworking that is going to be best for this particular problem, and someone else having digging their heels in about something as well. So all of that is going to happen, whether you're part of VOAD or you're just living and breathing and interacting with any other people. So I do want to emphasize that these are excellent sources and resources. None of them, we are not perfect in all of this, but people committing to figuring it out together so that people's unmet needs are met, that's the goal. So that's what I think being able to cooperate, communicate, coordinate, collaborate is about. And those are the VOAD 4 C's there. Our C here is just Christy. It's amazing. And CC, carbon copy Christy. So we've got three C's here. But I encourage you to look at this particular type of organization, the VOAD. Now, I'm not going to go too deeply into long-term recovery groups, but if you have a long-term recovery group in your community, can you just put that in the chat? I just want to see how many people have something there. Now, not all, okay, yep. Northeast, okay. You have a COAD, okay, great. Yeah, no, great. It could be LTRG or a COAD in your areas. Oh yeah, Monroe, you guys definitely do in a COAD. Okay, great. Keep going. Oh yeah, Charlotte, United Way. Thank you. Okay, great. So you all in so many ways are very familiar with this. Here's the thing, a long-term recovery group, it's a cooperative group of entities. It has a lot of overlapping with VOAD. The VOAD is a membership association that is not doing this specific work in this way. It's made up of typically is faith-based groups, nonprofits, government and businesses in some areas, and they're working together to assist us, individuals and families as they recover from disasters. The structure varies widely. Often a disaster relief entity or maybe the government EM department, someone is kind of sponsoring or facilitating a long-term recovery group after something has happened. It is about long-term recovery, but it does depend on your area, what your community is. A lot of this has to do with what specifically your community needs. And so long-term recovery groups, again, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I'm going to send you all links to a lot of these things as well. And if you're in a county and you're not sure, if you've had any kind of significant emergency or disaster in the last 5 to 7 years, you probably have had some version of a long-term recovery group. But please let me know. I can always touch base with our EM department about whether there's one active where you are if you aren't sure. A lot of times long-term recovery groups, as those unmet needs are met, turn into COADs, which is community organization active in disaster, community organizations active in disaster. So there are a number of ways you can connect to groups doing this work through all phases of the disaster cycle. And it is so critical to do that. And for those of you already in the mix, who are potential partners for you who can connect to the work that you're doing via pipeline for volunteers and so on. So let me switch over. Again, a lot of this is about the information you have and the understanding you have of how all of this works. And I think a lot of us, it's helpful to have the refreshers too. All right, so volunteering, little bit of, Melanie, that's a good question. There is a cost. It's not significant. I'm not sure the actual amount, but good question, there is. Okay, so for volunteering, it's to choose to act in recognition of a need. Now, I think this is really interesting. It says with an attitude of social responsibility and without concern for monetary profit, going beyond one's basic obligations. I thought this was really interesting because it's not necessarily an attitude of social responsibilities. Volunteers have a lot of different reasons why they want to volunteer. Some of it could be praise. We get a lot of people with that superhero mentality during storms and so on who want to come in and save the day. And it's kind of a interesting version maybe of social responsibility. But the idea here is that when we get volunteers who have a good understanding of what they do, they're not being paid for this necessarily, or they're not getting paid for it. And they're going beyond their basic obligations in life. So This is significant. We want people to have opportunities to serve, and we're thankful for all of the people, all of the volunteers who do this work. We couldn't recover from disasters without all of the volunteers who support the work that you all do and so many other organizations do. So I referenced before, how many of you all, if you use volunteers, how many of you all do training in disaster response or preparedness or recovery? How many of you all in general do training in disaster relief in some way with your volunteers? Especially those of you who are not in emergency management, how much do they know and are connected to any sort of disaster relief? If that makes sense. So if you use volunteers, are they trained in, okay, so Operation Veteran. Hi, Pam. Teaches disaster relief. Okay, great. Okay, TSA does. Okay, Citrus County, FDB. Okay. Oh, you have ADART. Okay. Oh, that's right, Lauren. That's great. All right, perfect. Food bank training for, okay, perfect. So this is the kind of thing that is so important. If your blue sky work is not directly related to disaster preparedness, for example, to give volunteers not just what they would do during a disaster, but some of that bigger picture of where you are in this whole structure, you know? So where exactly does Operation Veteran Connect fit in when it comes to the bigger picture work going on in the Hillsborough area if there's a disaster, right? So those structural things that we talked about, their CERT may not need to be that level of detail, but that you fulfill a specific role, but other people do the other work. It doesn't mean that there won't be gaps in service and all of that, but that overarchingly, we have learned in so many devastating ways some things that could be helpful during a disaster. And I am making that's an understatement there. And that it is so important for people to have that knowledge in addition to the skill set that they may need in case something does occur. So these are all affiliated volunteers, everybody who's mentioning. So you have, okay, great. BRC, which is a volunteer reception center in advance, pre-connect with CERT volunteers. Excellent. Thank you for that, Stephanie. So perfect example. Connecting with other agencies, having those pre-established, if it could be that you go out to coffee and just get a better understanding of what the the key food bank or multiple food banks in your area do during a disaster. And maybe your organization says, we would love for our folks to be trained and to cross-train essentially. These folks could be from a different organization. You can help your current volunteers, whether it's disaster relief or not, get connected to disaster relief work because we need those volunteers desperately. And what is best is if they are already trained and they have a working knowledge of how disaster response and recovery works, okay? I have done some volunteer work and heard people say the most inaccurate things about the very organization they're volunteering for, which is mildly disturbing. I've been on a few boards where fellow board members have done that. You know, I'm talking to them and what they're relaying to me about what we even do is not correct. So you don't want people going out, especially with something like this, and not having a good understanding of who you are as an organization, where you fit in, bigger picture. And then on the other side of that, those volunteers that you use could be crossover volunteers to support disaster relief, or you could be thinking about the way your organization can mobilize your existing volunteers or your staff to serve, okay? And incidentally, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but the Florida Disaster Leave Act, if you are a disaster relief organization, you can, and what I would do is kind of petition for this or get connected to state government entities. And I know most of us are here in Tallahassee, but state employees can take up to 12 weeks, I believe it is, of admin leave to serve during disasters. I don't know how many of you all are aware of that. I can send you the fact sheet about it. Now, of course, their supervisor has to approve all of that. There's more to it than that. It used to be that that was just focused on sheltering and the Red Cross, but it has been opened up to any organization that is doing disaster relief. Now, you have to be vetted a little bit. The supervisor, sometimes they're going to probably call us and see if we're connected to you. But that's huge, the amount of time that you can have a state employee supporting your work free of charge, from the state. So just letting you know, there's a source of affiliated volunteers that you could potentially get some support from, that you could mobilize. The thing with this training that you all are doing, dedicated volunteer reception center volunteers, maybe there are other organizations that have people that they work with or volunteers who could also be VRC volunteers. You can pull those individuals in. I know a lot of places, the library staff also are trained in volunteer reception center work, because that's where a lot of places have them. Great resource, right? You may not be thinking about your library when it comes to disaster relief, but can you partner with them and connect with them so that you're training another set of volunteers, even if they're outside of your direct organization, who can support you during that time? And if you're a library, you can think about that. Wow, our people may not be doing the typical volunteer work that we would. We're going to be shut down, whatever the case is. Why not have them trained to go support the VRC, support the food bank, whatever the organization is, right? So the spontaneous volunteers, of course, can be kind of, this can be a lot. It can also be wonderful. Some of you, this is your bread and butter, is to have these spontaneous volunteers who come on the spot and support, okay? Timely help, they're not necessarily attached to a particular organization. And so there's vetting and there's kind of funneling that has to go on there that can be a little more complicated. But also many of you are prepared for that. You could, again, with a volunteer reception center, you could have another organization that's not necessarily in your sphere who says, yeah, we're going to come in, you train our volunteers, the people that we already have that support our work, to help vet and train or, orient spontaneous volunteers. Lots of connections that you have. Yep, there it is, Melanie. Thank you so much. And I'll send the fact sheet out to you all if you have an interest in that. There's more detail on the Department of Management Services site, but it's a pretty fantastic opportunity. A lot of state employees don't really even know about it, but if you all do, if there's any statewide government groups you work with, which many of you do, or you are, reach out and remind them of it and say, is there a way we can partner on this? Anyway, who in your community can help you with those spontaneous volunteers? Who in your community can you get to grow your base of affiliated volunteers? We want you to use Volunteer Connect. You all recruit in many different ways, but you could have 20 volunteers through a particular nonprofit that you wouldn't normally think of as disaster relief, who then become allies for you and become a larger part of your volunteer corps because you have that understanding with one another. And that's an organization that you can share bigger picture information about disaster relief with. I think that it is so important, not all of this information in this workshop, but when you all are at meetings and talking through things, for people to understand how response and recovery work. I just want to emphasize that again, because preparedness is what people think of, and then they think it's just this free-for-all after that. But I have friends so often, just casually even, who have said, well, actually, there's way more to it than that. The more people know, and it doesn't mean, again, that it's perfect, but the more people understand that structure, you all sharing that with your other partners, other community groups, the better when the actual disaster comes. Oh, wait, with response, cash is best. I need to confirm that the need is there before I actually do something. Oh, well, fortunately, we're already affiliated with our partner organization here. And so they'll let us know if something is necessary. Okay. So the expansion of some of those relationships is really important. And back to this, if you can have as many people as you can have to be leaders in vetting spontaneous volunteers, the better. And that loops back to that messaging. What are you saying on your social media, on your in your emails, and on your website about how this works when people want to respond? It's just so important to give people the right public information in the bigger picture way, because it helps them traditionally or significantly. So here's what I wanted to have you think about. So what expectations did your community have of your organization when disaster strikes, or of your volunteers? So what's gone on in those, association groups like your VOAD, your COAD, your LTRG, with your county emergency management partner, with just other partners that you have? Maybe it's the specific area of town that you live in, and you all have determined that, okay, if something happens to our building, we will go to this area. And the community foundation, that was a huge, I think a lot of those of you in Charlotte County, the Charlotte Community Foundation had power, had people coming in and out of there because they could locate people there. So some of those thoughts, for your own operations. So I know that is what you have to do, is those mission critical things for your own organization. So I get that that's most important, but where can you be in order to help continue to deploy volunteers or to support your partners who are doing the direct disaster relief work? Okay. How can you use the strength of the network that you have to meet those expectations? That's that continuing education. It's understanding how things actually work during response and recovery and mitigation and preparedness, right? So that's part of the strength, is that it helps buttress up the work that you're doing. The more you can learn about how all of this works together, and then the more you can think outside of the box once you have that foundation, as I just mentioned. And that's, again, for you disaster relief folks, as well as those of you who are not necessarily in that space. So a couple of key things about volunteers. If you say we have the space and we're happy to help, we got to figure some of this out ahead of time. Who's going to vet those volunteers, the responsibility for training, what skills will be needed? If you're supporting an organization, your agency, your organization has volunteers who, even though you do this particular type of work, maybe it's animal welfare or whatever the case is, you are going to move into more of a disaster relief space if something happens, right? It's rescue for animals or some sort of other particular goal. And you're working with other partners, disaster relief partners, for that. Understand what vetting needs to happen, what training needs to happen, what skills need to be there. Figure all that out ahead of time, as much of it as you can. The disaster, not necessarily going to be able to do that. But thinking through those things ahead of time is really key. So a couple of things I just want to share with you. A little bit of homework. One is those questions, and the questions I ask, I want you, if you're willing to do it, to really think about it. Okay. So, all right, well, we're the CERT program here, and here are the things we do. There's your mission, which is you outward. Here's what we do, and here's how we do it through programming. Our input essentially is kind of our mission. We've got our resources, and our outputs and our outcomes are these things in the community. The question was, how do others see? Let's see. I'm going to go back to it real quickly. What expectations does your community have of you? And I think thinking through both of those things is important. If you are achieving your mission, wonderful. Do other people see you that way? And if they do or they don't, why not? Is it worth it to try to shift that? Okay. So that when things happen, are they going to Are you a trustworthy source of information? What kind of information are you giving them? You know, all of those things I think are important for us to remember. We can get very used to whatever network we're already in and how we see each other, you know, the 20 of us working in the county or in the city or in the community. And there are so many other groups, so many others who maybe say, you know what, you guys are in the ivory tower. We don't know anything about this. And so we just kind of let y'all do your thing and you're great at it, but we have no idea what's happening. Right. And that could be huge stakeholders in your community, but they just don't have the knowledge because it hasn't been shared with them and because they don't feel like they can double dutch into the whole foray, right? Meaning they don't feel comfortable or disaster EM enough to connect with you. So those are the things we want to think about. How does the community see us? It doesn't mean that we have to change anything, but it's helpful for us to know outside of specific realm that we're in, so to speak. So your ESF 15, not all local entities have them, they kind of should, but just like we are ESF 15 for the state, county EM departments typically have an ESF 15 representative. And if they don't, that's fine. The county EM person is a great person to just know. And you can ask, again, if you just pop into it, you know, if you just want to kind of sit in maybe on a VOAD meeting, you're not doing membership, but maybe just one, you wanted to get an idea of what it's like. Or you connect with one of the folks on this call. Everybody's got a county EM department. And you say, what can I do? What can our organization do? What can our volunteers do to show up when something happens? And remember, EM is not just a hurricane. It could be a natural disaster or another type of hazard. I hope that you find out who those contacts are, whether it's me or otherwise. Find out if you have a VOAD, if you have a COAD, know who those people are. Follow them on Facebook. You know, this isn't necessarily a time-intensive thing, but you can learn more and more so that you can provide the correct information to the people around you, and so that your volunteers are better prepared when they serve to know the bigger picture of how everything is working and not just the one particular type of work that they're doing, right? When engagement opportunities are, what engagement opportunities are there for? Relationship building. So some of those are those organizations I mentioned. What are your messaging and communication strategies, which I just talked about, whether they need to be developed or refreshed. I have a lot of resources when it comes to some of these things, but we want to both be very kind of detailed about what we share, what we learn, how we train our volunteers, but we also need to be comprehensive about it so that everybody knows. I am really into Transformers still, even as a 41-year-old, and I just love it. Optimus Prime, right? He is a robot, and then he, just follow me here, transforms into a semi-truck, right? That is what is happening here, okay? Is we are one thing in a lot of ways, and then we are transforming into this other particular type of work that we have to do that can be so overwhelming and so tough for us. And I know most of you have experienced that in one way or the other, but we transform, we make it work, we figure out how it all will look so that we can serve our communities. And so much of that is, thank you, Lisette. Maybe I just wanted to mention Transformers. I don't even know if it was a good metaphor, but this is the kind of thing that I think is important for us to reflect on when we have a moment, is what our relationships look like, how we can help our own volunteers understand where they fit, where our organizations fit, where other organizations fit, so that we can minimize a competition component of this, or what I do is more important than what someone else does. When we can do that, regardless of what the news cycle says, we know that we're effectively mobilizing volunteers to do work that they understand, and they understand how everything comes together. And then we have a better sense of what our role is locally when we do this kind of work. So I know we're, thank you, Lisa. So I know we're out of time, and I'm gonna just put, I know you all know this. I feel like I know almost all of you. You're just delightful humans. There's my email address. I think I spelled volunteer right. Who knows? I will send the PowerPoint out to you all. I know that was a lot of talking, and I already don't like the sound of my voice after this hour, so I'm sure you all are just done too. But I really wanted to try to get through as much information as I could about the fact that we all have a role to play, and that these are a couple of the highlights in terms of where we connect, how we connect with each other, and how we equip our volunteers. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you. Basically, my husband and my daughter are the only ones that love my voice and my face, really. I mean, I'm fine with that, but now I have Lauren that I can add to it. So please email me if you have questions. We've got a 3-person EM department with far more information than I have, and I am happy to refer you. I've got a quadrillion resources. If you are interested in terms of the survey we did about volunteerism, it's on the website under volunteer services. We did a huge survey just about the nature of volunteerism in the state. It's not about disaster relief specifically, but we've got lots of different resources. All of our recordings are posted. This will be posted. So I'll send all of that to you all. But Keely, thank you for that. Yes, there's 2 certs: state emergency response team, that's government coordination, and then community emergency response team. I will send that to you as well, because the RFP is currently out for CERT, if you're not aware of that, CERT. Let's see, CLS. So, okay, great. You all are lovely. I do want to say real quickly that this is my Dr. Evil, like 1950s doctor shirt, and I wore it just for you all. Let's make it sense. You all are so great and so patient with me. Those of you who know me know that I'm just a little quirky, but I'm really passionate about what I do and want to provide whatever information I can to the field that would be helpful. Last thing, if you have topics that you're interested in having trainings on, not just me, panelists, national speakers, we are always looking for and have a budget for training. So I would love to know what you all want to learn more about, not just in the disaster relief space, just anything. So that we can provide those opportunities to you. So in that way, please let me know if you have anything that you'd like to hear more about. All right, you guys are wonderful. Thank you for your patience dealing with all of my Jovita-ness, and then I hope that there was some information there that's helpful for you all. So we'll be in touch by email with those resources, and then feel free to touch base with me anytime if you have any questions or have any needs. I'm happy to try to point you in the right direction. All right, thank you all so much. I hope you have a wonderful day. Here you all are. Bye-bye.